What's going on, guys?
Hello.
Yeah, what's going on?
Hello.
If you'd like to keep an eye on that, on the YouTube studio thing, because I'm going to start this. It's going to be running our boxing ring.
Okay. Yeah.
What? Oh, wait. There goes. We are currently muted. So they can. Please remember to hit that thumbs up if you like the show, and don't forget to subscribe for more great content. Little reminder to attack the argument and not the debaters or each other. Now, since you're not here to listen to me ramble on, let's get to the show. Void will be going first, and Void, the mic is all yours.
Okay, hello. My name is Dmitry. I am a citizen of Russian Federation and my wife is a citizen of Ukraine. And I'm here today to argue that it is required to continue and increase military aids to Ukraine to help it to retake back the territories, or otherwise we jeopardize the security of Europe and the rest of the world. In Europe, it took centuries of suffering wars and inhumane atrocities. A few seconds. Sorry. I have technical problems. Please, sorry. Okay. Sorry. It took centuries of suffering wars and inhumane atrocities in Europe to develop culture built on values, institutions, politics that aims to prevent a war and to make sure countries collaborate, share resources, keep peace, and that the errors and aggression of the past is not tolerated. And it was successful enough so that a war was already believed to be long gone. But then Putin started an aggressive war in Europe. And it is obvious that if Putin is allowed to take what he wants, then the Pandora box of war will be reopened in Europe. Failing to stop Putin, I don't know. People report me that my sound is duplicated. Is that true? I don't think so. Okay. Okay, let's then ignore that. Failing to stop Putin will embolden his aggression. In a fundamentally similar way, appeasement policy failed in the 20th century. To see that, let's remind ourselves that before the full-scale invasion, Putin already annexed territories of Georgia and Ukraine. I mean, in Ukraine in 2014, long before. He forced war in the east of Ukraine. He spilled chemical warfare agent in the UK, and he did other atrocities already. I mean, even before this war. And it is very clear by now. Longer Europe and others wait, more emboldened imperialist ambitions of Putin are. We waited for so long that he already started the largest war in Europe since World War II. There is no more room left for waiting any longer. Either Europe stands up for its security or surrenders what Europe worked for the last 70 years by building peace, freedom, and prosperity. The only way to stop this insanity is to unambiguously demonstrate to Putin that nobody is allowed to destroy peace in Europe, and their aggression won't be tolerated. By the way, it is forbidden to disagree with the government in Russia. So right now I am committing a crime by just saying that. Do you really want to live in such world, or Putin should be stopped at least at some point? And he won't stop until somebody will stop him. Any success of his aggression emboldens his power and ambitions to continue with an even larger aggression. This was not recognized until the February of 22nd year. And because of that, one European country is in ruins already. There could not be any middle ground with such a mass murderer. He must be stopped by the end of this year. And just to support my view, let's refresh few moments from the last year. Putin demanded in December 2021. Putin's demand in December 2021, before the war, was to withdraw all NATO forces from Eastern Europe, which effectively means to the end of NATO overall. He even claimed that the war they are having right now is against the whole NATO. And so this is not limited by Ukraine. This is about supporting a country which became a victim of foreign aggression. We support them to fight for their country, lives, children, homes, and freedom. One cannot be neutral against this kind of aggression, like, for example, Belgium, Denmark, or Norway were in 1940. And one may never build peace through appeasement, as we already saw in 20th century. The only way to guarantee peace is to stand up against the aggression. Otherwise, we do the same mistake as people who wanted to negotiate with Hitler and continue appeasing him. Ukraine needs permanent long-term security to guarantee that this will never happen again. And Putin doesn't respect any. The only way to guarantee the security of Ukraine is to push back. There is no other way, because Budapest agreement, Belarus memorandum, borders agreement, and other agreements were broken already. Putin just doesn't respect agreements. You cannot force peace through agreements. The sooner Putin will understand he cannot get what he wants, the sooner peace will emerge. If Putin cannot Putin can just pull out the forces, and then the war ends. You know this phrase. And if Ukraine stop fighting, then Ukraine. If Ukraine ends, then Putin only get a confirmation that the aggression really works, and he needs to continue, as we already observed with Putin during last years. I see no other choice but increase military support of Ukraine. And the good news here is that Ukraine never lost a single strategic battle since the May of 2022. And only successful retaking of it and crushing the enemy what happened. Just imagine, the first days or first weeks, Ukraine, so basically Russian planes were attacking different objects all over Ukraine. Ukraine had no military support. They had their main weapon was Molotov cocktails and javelins. And Russia had fresh 200,000 army and fresh armored equipment and all that. Right now, Russian army is exhausted. They use equipment of like 40 years of production and things like that. And now Ukraine has support, has trained people, trained from all over the place. So I believe it will be very unwise to stop supporting. Yeah, but you said about killing Ukrainians in context of moral judgment. What I'm saying, what I want to be acknowledged is that Ukrainians are the only people who have right to do moral judgment about killing Ukrainians. Do you agree with that?
Party could not look at the Ukraine war and say that's immoral?
Sorry, say again, please.
I don't agree with that, because it gives the impression that a third party or someone who's not Ukrainian could not say that the war is immoral.
I'm saying that the final word should be said by Ukrainians about what is good and what is bad for them.
For them?
Yes.
Well, it's a moral judgment, so I think others could say it. Are you saying that you believe that the Ukrainians should be allowed to determine whether or not they themselves want to continue the war?
Yes.
Okay, well, I don't think anyone is disagreeing with that. Ultimately, they have the sovereign ability to do that.
Okay, so the argument about continue of killing Ukrainians is allowed instead of pushing peace is not really an argument if Ukrainians wants to continue this war. That's correct?
No, because what I'm saying is that the issue is foreign involvement. Foreign involvement is what is causing the conflict to be allowed to be continued.
Ukrainians will continue this conflict no matter what, with support or without support. That's just after Bucha.
I don't think so. I think if the United States and NATO were to push and withdraw military support, that Ukraine would be forced to come to the peace table and to try to negate as much of the damage that they sustained as they can.
They tried to negotiate peace, but basically the conditions of
But
peace
the
proposed by
United
Putin is to just concede everything Putin wants. There is like no other
Well,
peace proposed.
this is actually incorrect. The initial peace talks directly after the invasion back last year now. In that negotiation, Putin pushed, I'll put the link down, Putin pushed for recognition of Crimea and the eastern occupied regions. And if that was internationally recognized as Russian sovereign territory, he would have stopped
No,
the conflict.
no. You miss the most important point. There was so-called demilitarization and denazification, which basically means he wants to replace the government Ukraine had with something else he agrees on. So basically, he wants a puppet government in the country. That was the point, like the main point, which everybody was against of.
That was the justification he gave to the
No.
However,
That was on peace agreements. It was the condition of peace. We can just open Wiki and to take a look together. Peace, Russia, Ukraine, negotiations. Okay. Yes. And demilitarization and denazification. It was a demand from Russia in 3rd of March.
I understand that. What I'm saying, right, is that this is Russia's demand. The United States and Ukraine's demand would be the complete removal of Russian troops. So they would come to the negotiating table and reach a compromise. That's what I'm pushing for. I'm not saying to acquiesce to Putin's demands. So
what you say, what you said, Ukraine asked.
The United States would hypothetically demand the only way for peace to be the complete removal of Russian troops from all occupied areas. So both sides would come with their opposing views and reach a peace settlement where they could compromise. That's the point of pushing for a peace agreement.
As I already said, it was requested from Russia. Russia rejected this proposal.
And if you continue to push for the peace, they will eventually overcome it. No one's going to immediately acquiesce to whatever demands you have, because the U.S. demands for peace were not something Russia would agree to. So what I'm pushing for is for both parties to de-escalate the war and force a peace negotiation.
Again, Putin agree to peace only on conditions where basically Ukraine surrenders.
There weren't negotiations long-term over which they could talk these things out. It was simply a one-time offer and Putin rejected it.
No, that's not true. Again, if you open this page, which I already opened, there was 5 rounds before Bucha, and that was one story. After Bucha, Ukraine drastically changed their position, and there was
Yes, exactly.
so much rounds after that. Basically, Russia
now
rejected peace like 20 times already, with the conditions you just mentioned.
During the initial phase, of course it would. It was making massive gains. Why would it push for the peace agreement when it's making massive strategic gains in the conflict? That doesn't make sense.
I'm saying what you propose doesn't work. Everybody tried. Putin doesn't want that, and that's just fact. We can just look at this together, but that's just fact.
Okay, that's very nice emotional rhetoric. However, the fact remains.
Yes, the fact remains.
It is a fact of the nature of the conflict that Russia has achieved massive strategic gains, and it is now in a position where it can compromise and come to a peace agreement. You cannot compare the peace offer during the initial invasion to the situation Russia is currently in Ukraine and the situation the Ukrainian forces are in currently. The conflict has already been waging on for a year plus. The lines and the land control has been overall established, with some exceptions, for example, in the northeast, along the northeastern portion of the Russian-Ukrainian border. So, because the lines of control have been, in a way, de facto drawn up by the conflict zones between the free Ukraine areas and the Russian occupied areas, it's now a good time to push for peace. And factually, if you look at it, Russia has a very good incentive to de-escalate, because it would allow it to legitimize the areas it's occupied. And Ukraine is in a situation where it cannot push Russian forces out of the occupied territory. Therefore, it also has to come to the peace table. Factually, it would appear that the gains and the situation for both parties allow it to that it is it is beneficial for both of them to come to the negotiation table. That's my point.
First of all, Ukrainians won't agree on that after Bucha. They will continue war no matter what, and they will do counter-offensive in like June or whatnot. Will West stop supporting Ukraine or not? That's just like that. What will happen no matter what. Secondly, like you kind of ignore what I said, that Putin doesn't respect agreements. He doesn't honor them. There was a huge ton of different agreements with Putin, and he always breaks them. So even there was international backing. For example, Беловежские соглашения. Again, on all those agreements, there was international backing already. He just ignores that. He ready for any consequences West is ready to throw on them. This is like he already broke all international agreements here.
Because there was no. Okay, in the past, the United States and NATO had no bargaining chips, in a way, to push for a peace settlement. If they had pushed for if Putin had agreed to a peace settlement last year, he would not be in a beneficial position to himself. Currently, if Russia agrees to a peace settlement, it will have made strategic gains, and it will have been in a better position than it was during the start of the conflict, and therefore the conflict in its eyes would have been a strategic success. Therefore, it makes logical and rational sense for Russia to come to the peace table, and I believe they would, because it is logical, come to the peace table if the United States and NATO push for it. You cannot compare Russia's refusal to come to the negotiating table in the beginning of the war compared to now.
Again, let me repeat what I'm saying. I'm saying even if you do peace agreement with Russia and they withdraw forces from some territories or whatnot, nothing stops Russia to start over when they will prepare new army, new people.
Zelensky and the current Ukrainian government was actually brought in by the United States in 2014. This conflict has been planned for the past 9 years. In order to prevent further civilian loss, rather than deploying this strategy of a prolonged conflict in which Russia will gain as much as it can without the risk of escalating to global war, the United States should push for an immediate ceasefire and from there try to negotiate whatever peace deal it can achieve.
You ignore what I say. No matter
Your
what.
claim, your claim is that Putin will not respect any peace deal. What I'm saying is that this is not correct because the current situation is that Russia will have to accept a peace deal if pushed in order to prevent global war and the threat of escalation into nuclear war.
Yeah, but
so Russia has incentive now to follow the peace negotiation and the negotiated outcome, whereas in the past he did not have an incentive to do that.
Yeah, but West is too afraid for nuclear war, and Putin see that he can do whatever he wants, and West will always be afraid because they afraid of escalation. So they can, they can make peace agreement, wait, gather new army, new upgrade military equipment, make better military alliance, and capture the rest of Ukraine. Because West will be afraid to basically your arguments will be repeated again, because we saw these arguments in 2014 already, and this is where we got to because of these arguments already.
The U.S. the apparent weakness of the U.S., as you put it, which I don't think is actually the case, is simply an attempt or a strategy to prevent immediate escalation on the part of the U.S. The U.S. is, in a way, holding itself back in order to prevent an escalation to global war. I've already brought in other parameters, for example, the fracturing of NATO that the Ukrainian conflict has caused. The immediate escalation of this war will further fracture NATO, will risk the escalation to global war, and will, quite frankly, result in the complete destruction of Ukraine, because Ukraine will simply turn into a battleground where remaining NATO and US forces fight against Russian forces.
Again, let's judge morality about lives of Ukraine by opinion of Ukrainians. Let's not judge for themselves. If they want to continue this war, this is their choice.
If Ukraine wants to turn itself into a battleground which is uninhabitable, in which Russian and US troops fight until there's escalation into a global war, then they have the right to say that. However, because this will involve...
Look, you talk very much. We kind of... so in your initial statement, you did like 7 things I wanted to comment on. I tried to comment on one of them, then you create like 7 inside one of them, and we... could you just provide more laconic answers?
We have to examine every single relevant factor, and if that requires us to break down each individual point, to the nth degree, then we have to do that.
I know the details. You don't need to tell me the details. I'm observing this war very closely each day of my life since it started. You don't need to pronounce things. You just tell your view like on high level, like laconically. What is your position here? You no need to describe me things.
I'm restating occupied territory. This is impossible. Ukraine does not have, first of all, enough people to do that. It does not have the resources to continue a conflict in order to push Russia out, and it does not have the air support, the long-range artillery, the anti-aircraft weaponry required. It has none of these things. So it's impossible, literally, for Ukraine to, without U.S. troops on the ground, to push Russia from its occupied territories.
So then how Ukraine kicked off Russia from outskirts of Kiev, including Bucha, from Liman, from Kharkov Oblast and all that, from Kherson?
Because Russia has not deployed full military might like it did in Syria. If Russia wanted to, they would conduct a massive
That's just false.
campaign.
That's factual false. We can go through sources and Russia used 200,000.
Russia would deploy the same tactics it did in Syria, where it
tried.
Massive.
It tried.
It did not.
It tried.
It did not flatten Kiev to the same degree it flattened Aleppo and Damascus.
It cannot. Can I say? I just know this thing. I can tell you. Russia tried. First days, if you look at videos and all that, you will see a lot of planes flying here and there, bombing different buildings, different objects, and so on. But apparently, Ukraine. May I say? Stop. Wait. May I say? But apparently, Ukraine, in contrast to Syria, has anti-aircraft missiles, and Russia started to lose a lot of very expensive airplanes with pilots, so they had to stop because they never gained air superiority in this war.
Okay, this is not true. Russia simply did not push to establish aerial superiority, because doing so would result in direct U.S. intervention militarily. If Russia wanted to, it would flatten Kiev with extreme bombing like it did in Syria. It would do that.
In Syria, it took months to do that.
Excuse me. Can you please give each other time to speak your points and not overtalk each other? It makes it really difficult for the audience to hear your points.
Okay. So what we need to do, sorry?
The time frame over which Russia was able to flatten Aleppo is not necessarily that important, because, as you said yourself, it was over months. This is still a relatively short time frame. If Russia wanted to, it would use heavy bombard artillery and aerial superiority to completely flatten Kiev and Ukraine and have a complete destruction of Ukraine's infrastructure. However, it's not going to do this because the United States and NATO would respond in part with direct action, and this would lead to global war. The entire dynamic I'm trying to say here is that Russia is not giving 100% military action because the threat of the United States and NATO intervening is acting as a deterrent. If Russia wanted to, it could completely flatten Ukraine, but it's not going to, because the US and NATO would respond militarily and directly. That's the dynamic. What we see here going on is simply what the US and NATO has calculated it can allow the Russians to take control of without needing to escalate it. That's the entire dynamic. And the same thing is going on the Russian part. So Russia is only, in a way, pushing how far it thinks it can push without the US and NATO directly intervening. This is the entire dynamic of the conflict.
Yeah, but what you say is just built on false. As I said, Russia tried to bomb Ukraine and
did
it
not
failed.
try.
Can I
It did not
say?
try.
Can I say? So
You made a statement.
Kaiser Sultan, can you please give Vlad time to answer and please don't interrupt him? Thank you.
So what I'm saying, to bomb Aleppo, it took months, multiple months. So Russia had to pull out air force in few weeks after the war began. And the first weeks were mostly focused on bombing military objects, not on civilian objects. They started to bomb civilian objects only months after the war began. So Russia tried to bomb Ukraine with everything they got. They just failed because they never got air superiority. So everything you said after that about these dynamics is built on this false. So could you just restate your statement?
Okay, you just made a contradiction because you said that Russia first focused on military and then went to civilian. This
Yes.
in itself, this statement, okay, proves that Russia did not deploy a complete and total aerial bombing campaign. Because if it had been attempting to do a complete and aerial bombing campaign, it would not have started with first military and then moving over onto civilian. It would have completely flattened all infrastructure without differentiating what it was between civilian and military.
I can agree with you only if you talk about nuclear, tactical nuclear weaponry. If you talk about conventional weaponry, then I drastically disagree. Russia doesn't have like 100,000 of bombers. No, Russia have a very big fleet, but yet it takes weeks to bomb everything because you need to gather intelligence where to bomb, how, when, where nobody will shoot you down and things like that.
Okay, I'm not saying it's going to take a day. I'm arguing that the same course of time over which Russia was able to flatten Aleppo, which you yourself conceded was several months, it could do the same in Ukraine if it wanted to. That's my point.
And my point is, Russia tried and had to pull out air forces because they started to get a lot of losses. You interrupt me. I will just continue. I will just continue to talk over you if you interrupt me. Sorry. Just you talked very much, and I feel like I am not given a place to talk. So okay. What was I saying? Again, Russia tried that, but they had to pull out air forces because they started to get too much loss.
Okay, so your claim is that Russia deployed a complete aerial bombing campaign, and at the same time you're saying that the reason the bombing campaign did not succeed is because first they targeted military and then they moved towards civilian. So saying that they distinguish between military and then civilian targets in itself is proof that it was not an attempt at a complete aerial bombing campaign. Otherwise, if it was an attempt at a complete aerial bombing campaign, they will not make this distinction and would just push for an immediate, complete leveling of all infrastructure.
Let me restate again. Russia doesn't have like 100,000 bombers. They have much less amount of bombers. And when you fly around hostile territory, you first need to disarm your hostile, because otherwise you will lose all your air force. Because of that, air force of Russia was first focused on military objects, but they were unable to handle even that kind of objectives. They had not enough air power. So they had to pull off this air power.
Okay, what I'm saying is that the reason Russia did not successfully take out these military targets initially is because it did not want to carry out a complete aerial bombing campaign, because that would risk direct involvement of the United States. So the current aerial defense systems Ukraine has is not sufficient to shoot down the entirety of the Russian Air Force. Russia could quite effectively, as it did in Syria, level most of Ukraine's, or Kiev, for example, if you want to talk about Kiev, it could level most of Kiev and the surrounding infrastructure in a relatively short time frame, perhaps a couple of months, as it did in Aleppo. Ukraine does not have and does not possess the enough of the anti-aircraft equipment that is required to prevent that. So Russia could do that. Russia did not do that because it did not want to risk escalation and having the U.S. directly involved. It does not want U.S. fighter planes flying and fighting over Ukrainian skies. It does not want the United States giving Ukraine anti-aircraft missile systems and SAM systems. It does not want that. That's why it's not carrying out the campaign. It's not an inability to do so. It is a lack of willingness to do so because of the consequences.
That's just not true. First of all, Ukraine asked US and everybody to give no-fly zone exactly because there was a lot of planes bombing a lot of things all around the Ukraine. And then even when Russia started to bomb specifically civilian objects, specifically for Ukrainians to suffer, nobody intervened. US haven't intervened, Europe haven't intervened. So your argument about direct involvement because of full Air Force attack just doesn't stand, because West is too afraid to have direct involvement. They just would like to do not escalate.
Okay, I'll just say it again then. Russia did not carry a complete heavy aerial bombing out. It did not do this. The bombing
I already
of
answered
Kiev
on that.
is on a much... Okay, but you're simply reiterating your point without addressing what I'm saying. Russia did not drop as many bombs on Kiev as it did in Aleppo. Would you agree with this, yes or no?
As if we look at for how much time, so when planes operated, then no, I disagree. In Aleppo, they operated for years to do that job. In Ukraine, sorry?
You stated that Aleppo was flattened within several months. That was your statement, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so trying to elongate the time frame to years is irrelevant because you conceded yourself that Russia was able to flatten Aleppo in several months.
Okay,
what I'm saying is
let
that
me take a look.
All right, yeah, let's go ahead and pull the data up then.
Okay, Aleppo. Okay, basically, bombing in Aleppo began in early 2012, and when it ended.
I mean, it would have had continued strikes. What I'm trying to say is that the effective demolition of Aleppo's infrastructure.
It looks like it ended in 2016, so it took 4 years.
And that's the continuation of the bombing campaign. What I'm saying is that the effective demolition of Aleppo's infrastructure happened in a matter of months. That's my argument, which is what you said as well. So what I'm saying is that if Russia could do that in Syria, it could do the same thing in Ukraine. It just didn't attempt to do as intense of a bombing campaign as it did in Syria. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It did not attempt the intensity and the severity of it.
I already answered on that. Russia applied even higher intensity, but it had to distribute this intensity on military objects which Ukraine had and Syrian rebels haven't had, because Syrian rebels is not a regular army. And in the end, Russia felt too many losses and had to flee. And overall, they only had opportunity to bomb for like a couple of weeks. And they did bomb a lot of things during these couple of weeks, but they were scattered all across the country. They were not focused on Kiev specifically.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to say yes, I agree with you. Ukraine does have a much better anti-aircraft setup than Syrian rebel. What I'm saying is that you said that Russia was forced to focus a targeted bombing campaign on Ukrainian military sites in order to allow for the deployment of a aerial bombing campaign. Correct? In other words, Russia tried to first take out the military target so that its planes could fly freely without being shot down. That's your argument, correct?
Frankly, I feel like everybody is tired from us discussing this subject. I can continue if you want, but I think maybe we should switch to other point. For example, you were saying
Okay, all right,
practically
let's go to the
impossible.
second one.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Say-
So let's talk the generality then. I think we've been down
Okay.
this wormhole a bit too far.
Uh-huh.
I'll let you go ahead. You go ahead.
What I'm saying is, even without sophisticated equipment like HIMARS or things like that, Kiev was able to resist with much larger pressure. But they had to temporarily concede very important territories. Like, then, when Russia realized it's not so easy to capture Ukraine, they had to regroup specifically on eastern Ukraine. And even then, they had to concede Kherson, Kharkov Oblast, Liman, and all that, because they cannot spread so thin their resources to hold this territory. It basically means that the forces right now is about equal. But what happened during last months, Russia very hardly tried to capture Bakhmut. They basically mid-grinded the whole mobilized bunch of armies they made in November by now. So right now, like in this May or June, the move will be for Ukraine to do counteroffensive. And from my point of view, basically this is like the final battle, basically. So either Ukraine succeed and gets Melitopol, then it gets very good incentive to force Putin for peace, or this war gets into stalemate and basically goes forever. So from my point of view, if we want to guarantee peace in Europe and in the world, we need to end this war as soon as possible. And we have no other choice but these two. We cannot concede Ukraine. Ukraine won't agree on that. There is no such choice. So if you want to have peace, you need to help to recapture Melitopol. Without direct troops, without direct help, just give munitions and equipment. That's it.
Okay, so what I would say is that I agree with a large portion of what you said here. The point on which I disagree is that I think you're overestimating Ukraine's ability to retake and launch a successful counteroffensive at this stage. So, for example, you said that Russia attempted in the beginning of the war to come down south along the river and take Kiev, and that it was unable to do so, and that it was surprised it's unable to do so. I, to a large degree, agree with you on this. I say that I think Russia underestimated how much of a resistance Kiev would put up, and I think that Russia was expecting a quick and easy occupation of Kiev. Where I disagree is that you think, or you state that it was due to Ukrainian strategic and military brilliance that Russia withdrew. What I'm saying is that Russia simply calculated that the cost of occupying Kiev was too high to justify the occupation of Kiev, and so it decided to move to other theaters in the conflict. So that's, I think, where we disagree. You're saying that the reason for Russian failure in Kiev is because of the Ukrainian resistance and all these things. What I'm saying is that that's true, but ultimately the reason Russia didn't completely flatten and destroy Kiev is because the cost to Russia of doing that would be too high to justify doing it. So we agree on the situation here. I think where we're disagreeing on is the reason why this happened.
Yeah, okay, this feels like step forward in our conversation. So here I would say Ukraine was underestimated like already maybe 5 or 6 times strategically. So first of all,
I agree with that.
okay, then I won't enumerate that. And I agree that we don't know if Ukraine will be able to recapture Melitopol. I'm saying only one thing. I'm saying that either Ukraine will capture Melitopol, and then there will be a very good way to force Putin for peace, or not, and the war will continue for a long time. And the only way to improve chances to retake Melitopol without escalating war is to provide equipment and munitions. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, so what I would say in response to that is, if you are saying to supply Ukraine with equipment and strategic information and things like this in order to allow it to push for one more counteroffensive, then okay, I think I would agree with you on this. What I'm saying is that pushing for a prolonged conflict over years, where through a war of attrition, Ukraine slowly, potentially reclaims the entirety of the occupied regions, this is what I'm arguing against. I want to say that the U.S. and NATO should give Ukraine as much equipment to allow Ukraine to push for one more counteroffensive, so that when it comes to the negotiating table, it is in a stronger position. Okay, yeah, I would agree with you on this. So, yeah, I think on that point, we can agree. But what I would say, the risk of this is that there's a possibility that they say, not this, we have to launch one more, and then the conflict gets drawn out into a long, multi-year war. So I'm trying to balance these two possibilities. But if you want to, like you said, I think I'd agree with that.
About one more. I agree, there could be one more. But if we will see that there is no progress, like 2 times a row, 3 times a row, then we can say it doesn't make sense to continue. Because up until now, Ukraine haven't made a single failed counteroffensive. Every single counteroffensive was very successful. So it makes sense to continue while it works. When it will stop working and we will reliably see it doesn't work, then let's consider what you say. What you just said.
Okay, yeah. I guess I think we're coming from different perspectives. And I'm arguing with the assumption that the counteroffensives will inevitably at some point fail. So I guess I'm arguing for what will happen in the future over the next year, whereas you're arguing for what's a strategic policy that the U.S. should employ directly today.
I'm as
a... in my mind...
Sorry, continue.
Go ahead.
No, continue. Go ahead. Okay. As a Russian citizen, I just I was against Putin regime for more than 10 years, and I kind of learned. I don't know. I think I have some kind of understanding how it works. And from my understanding, which is very subjective, most likely wrong and all that, I'm just saying where I coming from, since you shared where you're coming from. From my understanding, the only way to really stop Putin is to push back. There is no other way at all. He doesn't afraid to escalate at all. If he sees weakness and desire for peace during war, he consider weakness. Then he will push further. He always do that, but when somebody gives pushback, he stops pushing further. That was a pattern for 20 years of Putin, and it was consistent. It would be weird if Putin would behave differently this time.
To be honest, the impression I get is that over the course of the debate, you've slightly adjusted your position. Would you say that's true?
I don't feel that way, but I'm open to your like.
Okay, because so initially, when we set up the debate, the impression I got of your stance is for the U.S. and NATO to send troops
No, 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 no,
and
no.
tanks. And okay, so
It
this
was
is
never the
position
case.
I was arguing. Okay, so this is the position I was arguing against.
Sorry, I might have expressed myself badly somewhere. I never meant that during the whole
alrighty.
war, anywhere.
Okay, so I mean, I guess it turns out we actually agree more than we disagree on
Okay.
the policy moving forward. I was arguing again because the proposition you had put forth, the way it was worded, it made it sound like you want U.S. troops and U.S. planes and NATO troops and planes to be fighting alongside Ukrainians against Russia. And that's why I kept bringing up the escalation of global war, and that's why I kept bringing that up.
I see.
So I guess I think, yeah, we agree probably more than we disagree.
Well, I basically propose what Zelensky asks. He asks for specific equipment, and we just need to provide this equipment. That's basically it. In the beginning of war, he asked for a no-fly zone and all that, and this was more arguable. I have no strong stance on this, but as for equipment, I have pretty strong stance that Ukraine should be provided with. With fighter jets, or my English is not that good, and things like that, which West doesn't provide Ukraine with yet, which is bad. By the way, apparently we have a question. What was the immigration?
Okay, all right. So wait, before we go to questions, okay, so I'm gonna make a statement, and then this will be my view, and then you tell me whether or not you agree with this.
Okay.
So I have adjusted what I say to some degree, I think, since we actually set up the debate last month. So my statement would be, I believe that in order to prevent further civilian death and the continuation of the war, both sides should push as soon as possible for a peace negotiation. However, Ukraine should seek to regain some strategic objectives in order to put it in a better negotiating position. This is, I think, my view. What do you think? Would you agree or disagree?
So I understand Ukrainian position is they are ready for peace negotiations if Putin is ready to pull out the forces from Ukrainian territories. I agree with this statement. If like in the second when Putin says he agree on this condition, I think Ukraine should be encouraged to somehow gently to proceed with this way. But I don't think Ukraine actually would need to be encouraged, because I'm pretty sure they will do it themselves. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're sort of. I think so. If you agree with the statement I made, I would agree with what you just said. But with what you just said here, so I guess yeah. I think that's kind of a resolution there. Should we move to questions?
Sounds great.
If you guys are ready, we have a couple of questions from the audience.
Okay.
All right, we now come to the close of the debate, guys. If you guys wanted to make any kind of short closing statement, now's the time. It's up to you.
Wait, I got this question for Kaiser by.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna read that in just a moment.
Okay, alrighty. Okay, closing. I guess I'll go first. My one's pretty short. I believe that the best policy right now is to push for a peace negotiation as soon as possible. However, I do concede that Ukraine would have to, in the next few months, achieve some strategic victory which it could use, and not even a large one, as you said, perhaps retaking certain strategic cities or areas, or inhibiting Russian advances in those regions. if Ukraine was able to do this by being given U.S. equipment, then it would be in a better position at the negotiating table. I think this is also good. So that's my closing statement, and that's my view.
Thank you, Kaiser Sultan. Boyd, would you like to make a closing statement real quick?
Yeah, I guess not on the subject, but I just want to say, Kaiser, thank you for joining this. I asked like 10 different people who were arguing against military support for Ukraine, and nobody agreed for live debates. So I am grateful that you agreed, and I'm a bit sorry that I was a bit emotional in some moments, but I guess that's it. Thank you.
That was a fun conversation. Thank you for taking your time to do it.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for participating. This was a very educational and informative debate. Now we have a couple of audience questions. The first one is for Kaiser, but Void, if you would like to answer it after Kaiser, feel free. This says, why is Kaiser acting like Russia or a non-willing participant or victim in this conflict?
I mean, I don't think I ever argued that. Boy, do you think I ever said that Russia was a non-willing victim or anything?
Let me
I ever gave that impression. I'm not sure.
Let me share one thing. So I understand like different people have different experience, and sometimes it's difficult to look at yourself from different perspective. But from my perspective, the overall in the US people, there is like some very bad habit to do not consider Ukrainians as part of this conversation. Like this is a dialogue between US and Russia. It is not. Like Ukrainians are the main subjective force here, in my opinion. And when like some people from the US say about things like this is US government tries to ramp up military something in the US or whatnot, like in Ukraine and Russia, at least in Ukraine, nobody cares. Like there is a war between Ukraine and Russia. Whatever happens to military industry in the US, if they prosper, okay, that's good. Why not? They are needed right now. But that's not the point of the discussion. So when you mention these things like about military industry and these things, it triggers this kind of impression.
Absolutely, okay. But I mean, I really don't know why he's saying that Russia is a non-willing participant. I don't think I ever said that. So, is this from P. Barnes? God damn it, bro.
Yes, it's from
Dude, that
P.
guy
Barnes.
just don't like me, man. I swear to God. But
You were acting. Okay, well, our next question comes from me, actually, and this is like a precursor to the war question. What was the immigration situation between Russia and Ukraine before the conflict broke out?
Well, our countries were very intertwined in terms of simple people. Like we had somewhat different culture, though in the like Western countries, people do not really differentiate us. They see like the same thing, especially before war. Now they learned how to differentiate us. For example, I worked at university. Like at least I think like 20% of my colleagues at university, I mean in the department I worked on, it was like 60 people, were previously from Ukraine. Like I started to live with my wife, who is Ukrainian, in Moscow, and basically a lot of Ukrainians were traveling into Russia before the war. But now it's very different. Though there are two stages of this war. So like first like initial war kicked off in 2014, and a lot of Ukrainians already there decided like never travel to Russia and things like that. But like the vast majority, I don't want to speak for Ukrainians. It feels wrong when I'm Russian. Yeah, I guess I will end here.
Well, P. Barnes decided to clarify for Kaiser, saying that we should stop arming Ukraine to avoid nuclear war suggests that Russia are in some sort of threat. Russia is threatening nuclear war, and they are the belligerent.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that's what my whole thing was that if the U.S. intervenes, then Russia's gonna escalate. Then America's gonna escalate. Then you have the threat of nuclear war. So I think he's trying to perhaps map it out that I'm arguing that somehow Russia's a victim here when I'm not. So I don't know what to say to that.
Well, that looks like the end of our audience questions. I'd like to thank you all for coming today, and hope that you enjoyed our show. If the participants have links, I will add them to the description. And if you like their performance here, please consider checking out their stuff. Remember to hit that like button if you like the show. Also consider subscribing to our channel and hitting that bell to make sure that you do not miss any of our exciting content coming up. Thanks again for coming. Remember, let's not fight. Let's debate the topics, and let's talk about the issues. Again, thank you, Kaiser. P-Bar. Thank you, Kaiser, Sultan, and Void for this debate.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
Take care, guys.